Here's a multiple choice question. Who does President Trump dislike more? For a second time, Senator John McCain has apparently nixed the effort to repeal Obamacare. Get this. McCain says there should be hearings and a debate and a bipartisan effort. Go figure. North Korean Supreme whatever Kim Jong-un, who called the president a deranged dotard. Now, in case you're interested, the definition of dotard is an old person who has become weak or senile. Or how about killing a couple of birds with one tweet? The president tweeting today, the Russia hoax continues. What about the totally biased and dishonest media coverage in favor of crooked Hillary? Joining us for more is New College political science professor Frank Alcock, Rod Thompson of the Sarasota Republican Club, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ magazine. Rod, let me start with you. Putting aside what you think of the Republican plan right now and Obamacare, what do you think about Senator McCain's reasons for voting no, or saying he's going to vote no, in terms of regular order, having hearings, debate, a budget score?
I mean, that sounds wonderful. That sounds just really nice. But that's not really the way things have been generally going in Washington, particularly on this issue.
Isn't that part of the problem?
It is. But it's both sides. You can't have just one side choosing to say, okay, we're going to be bipartisan. Obamacare was passed 100% partisan vote. There wasn't one Republican that voted for Obamacare. And they just had a little bit larger numbers. So, you know, I don't know if McCain's really been paying attention, but there isn't any extension of the hand by Democrats on the other side. The only way they're willing to work with Republicans is if Republicans basically don't do anything of substance to Obamacare at all. Well, that's not actually reaching across the aisle. So McCain's reasoning, I think, is faulty. I think the hearings and all that sounds great, but that wouldn't change anything because the votes are going to be the votes still. The problem that I have, the concern that I have, is that I've been a big defender of John McCain as a person, as a war hero, as an incredible leader in Vietnam, staying at the Hanoi Hilton when he could have left. I mean, there's a lot of great things to say about him. He's a gosh-awful bad Republican senator, and I think he's got a personal grudge with Trump, and it's understandable. Trump said mean things about him, and it looks like every chance he gets, he tries to torpedo the president, and I'm sorry that that may end up being part of his legacy because he's better than that.
Well, Frank, do you think that this is more of an issue of, you know, if you recall during the campaign, President Trump, candidate Trump, said that McCain was not a hero just because he was shot down over Vietnam. Do you believe that's McCain's reasoning, or that he has a legitimate and heartfelt?
My honest view, I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think the reasons that McCain voted against this bill are the exact reasons that he stated in his statement. I think he's getting towards the end of his career. I mean, he is staring mortality in the face of brain cancer, and I think he's just voting his conscience, and he thinks that that bill is just not in the best interest of the country.
Jacob, this week, as we saw in the story, a big factor, at least in the public debate this week, was Jimmy Kimmel.
Right.
I'm wondering, if you believe that had any kind of impact in terms of where the votes stand in the Senate, but furthermore, do you believe it has any impact on people who are watching this debate with us right now?
Well, it was a little interesting to see senators actually interfacing with Jimmy Kimmel on Twitter, but no, I don't think that ultimately had anything to do with where the votes fell. It did have something to do with the public perception, and ultimately, I think that's kind of what's been problematic about the healthcare debate, is everything is about the political image and everything is about how it's being sold to the public. I think that starts with constantly pushing for repeal rather than trying to sell some type of reform. If you actually have problems with healthcare, look for reform. But reducing it to repeal and turning it into this talk show fight, it ends up making it all about who's winning the issue rather than what's being accomplished.
Rod, I know you want to respond to that. I also want to point out that according to a new Washington Post ABC News poll, Americans prefer Obamacare to the latest GOP plan by a margin of 56-33.
I would dare those Americans to describe the Graham-Cassidy bill and tell me what's in it. You know, whenever the status quo is threatened, Americans seem to shift a little bit more in favor. I disagree with Jacob a little bit in that this does not have anything to do with repealing Obamacare. This is tweaking Obamacare. This is totally unsatisfactory for any conservative that wanted to see Obamacare repealed.
All right, we are going to take a pause, and we're going to keep talking about health care in a moment. We're just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Healthcare, North Korea, and turning up the heat on the Russia investigation. Joining us for more is New College political science professor Frank Alcock, Rod Thompson of the Sarasota Republican Club, and Jacob Ogles, political editor of SRQ magazine. Jacob, I'm wondering if you have a sense of how folks here on the Suncoast feel about this healthcare debate. Rod's not really interested in the polls in terms of reflecting where public opinion is, but there was another Kaiser Family Foundation tracking poll that came out showing that 69% of Americans think it's important for Congress to pass legislation to stabilize Obamacare. Only 47% think it's important to repeal and replace it.
Yeah, I think that people who are in the state of Florida care deeply about health care, but we're not really at a spot where we're talking about the specific impacts it's going to have on their lives yet. As long as we're talking about block grants, and as long as we're still talking broadly about the impacts of Obamacare, you're not going to see something that necessarily fires people up over their particular situation in life. You know, they're still probably driven more by their partisan leanings than they are by a discussion of policy.
Well, Rod, that brings us back to you, because some of the debate this week, at least among Democrats, is that even if you offer block grants to the states, you are cutting the amount of dollars for Medicaid and Medicare, and they raise the specter of your parents or your grandparents being kicked out of their nursing homes.
Yeah, right. Just like, you know, grandma was being pushed off the cliff in a wheelchair and all. I mean, these are famous scare tactics when it comes to health care. The problem is a couple-fold here. Number one is we never actually have an honest conversation about the economics of healthcare and the reality of what we're doing and what it's costing. We're on an unaffordable trajectory. That's part of the reason for trying to block grant it to the states, looking for more efficiencies by the states operating these programs, and then cutting it. Because we can't just keep saying, this is a good idea, we should do this, and throw money at it, and this one is, and this one is. And I would like to say that the economics and the reality of pre-existing conditions never gets an honest conversation.
Well, that's another conversation. But the question I had for you is, given what you're saying now, why, after 7 years of Obamacare, didn't the Republicans come into this process with a good plan that was explained? They seem to be making up on the fly here.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a couple problems there. Number one is they were totally unprepared for Trump to win. They ran consistent. This has been one of my big gripes, you may remember, with the Republican Party nationwide on this. They ran consistently about repeal Obamacare, and then at least 7 senators in the last election cycle that were elected by promising to repeal Obamacare have been voting consistently against the repeal Obamacare proposals that have been out there. So, I mean, I was all for primarying these people because I'm sick of that sort of action.
It's easier to repeal than it is to replace, and it's easier to run on slogans than the devil is in the details. This is a big idea that the Republicans have been pushing for the block grants. By definition, less money. There will be some cost savings. In terms of how much people pay, I think it's a mixed bag. There are going to be some winners and losers across different states. Will do well. Texas, California will get crushed under something like this. And then within states, there are going to be a number of people that'll be paying a lot more for their health care, or that might lose coverage. There might be some people whose costs go down. I think it's the most vulnerable people that'll be hurt, though, under this.
Turning to another topic, North Korea. North Korea is at least alluding to the possibility of blowing off a hydrogen bomb out in the Pacific Ocean, which is something that has not been done for many years after the U.S. and the Soviet Union had their test ban treaty. You had the leader of whatever Kim calling the president a deranged dotard, which we looked it up, a older senile individual. The president saying at the UN today or earlier this week that if we don't solve this, then there's a possibility that we will destroy North Korea. Frank, this is obviously a different way of dealing with North Korea as we've seen for the last couple of decades. What do you make of this?
It looks like, to myself, and I think a lot of people around the world, it's a chest-thumping insult fest with 2 maniacal leaders that have access to nuclear weapons, and they're starting to look and sound a lot like each other, and that's very scary.
Do you take offense to that?
Maniacal for Trump? Yeah, I take offense at that. Yeah, I mean, he's equating, if you're going to equate Kim Jong-un to Donald Trump, then you're not being reasonable about it at all.
That's what it looks like to the world.
Well, it may look like, well, it doesn't look like it to the whole world. It looks like it to a portion of the world. The problem here is that in North Korea, we've had multiple administrations by multiple parties that have kicked the can down the road. Now we have an increasingly heavily nuclearized, unstable country threatening us and all. If they do, I think his statement at the UN was that if they were to fire off, if they were to attack the U.S. or an ally, or if they were to threaten, which I think a missile with a hydrogen bomb into the ocean might be that, then we would destroy them. That is a restatement of U.S. policy for multiple administrations now regarding North Korea. So that's not crazy. When he says Rocket Man, that's just stupid Trump stuff. I wish he wouldn't do that because rhetoric does matter. But as far as the substance of what he's talking about there, it is completely consistent.
Jacob, some people have pointed out, and I'll get your response to that in a second, that at the same time, the president is alluding to the possibility of withdrawing from the Iranian nuclear agreement. And it raises the question, in terms of North Korea, that if the United States is willing to make a deal on nuclear weapons with one country and then later withdraw from it, what's the message to North Korea?
Well, we also have an administration right now that walked in talking about making deals, and so far has only made headlines by nixing deals. We talk about the Paris Accords, we talk about what happened with Iran. So I think that there's a lingering effect in terms of that. Now, that said, I think in the UN, Nikki Haley has done a job that's been pretty widely praised. So I don't think that we're rudderless when it comes to the UN. But when a speech from a world leader comes in that involves name-calling and seems to almost dismiss the idea of diplomacy, I think that's where things get problematic. Now, that said, we'll see what actually happens inside the UN with some of the players who actually sit down at the tables and make deals rather than just make posturing speeches.
Frank, do you have any real concern that this current state is any different in reality than it has been under President Obama, Bush, Clinton, before that, in terms of the danger of hostilities with North Korea?
I've not seen this type of escalation. I mean, Trump is just a very different politician, a very different type of president. So he's sort of unapologetically, he's, convention and diplomatic history is out the window. I think it continues to play well with his base. He got elected. When we get up to the international level, though, I don't think he has a really good handle of leverage, and I don't see the rhetoric and the posture increasing our leverage in any of these situations. And that's very troubling. I don't know how what he said at the United Nations gets us anywhere or makes anything better.
Japan and Australia both hailed his statements regarding North Korea at the United Nations. Those are two countries that are much closer to North Korea.
We have less than 2 minutes. I want to get to one more area, and that is the Russia investigation. You see the special prosecutor going after the president's former campaign chair hard. Even this week, they're talking about all the financial connections and dealings. Reportedly, Paul Manafort has been told by prosecutors he's going to be indicted. Now you have the special prosecutor asking for White House records on the firing of James Comey and Michael Flynn. I'm wondering what you all think of that.
Well, I think Manafort has looked like he was going to be indicted from minute one. The thing is, Trump can distance himself from Manafort fairly easily by saying he fired Manafort, and he did so because of the deep connections with Russia that were coming out in the press at the time. Where this goes from here, it's going to be curious whether it actually wraps members of Trump's administration, not just his campaign team.
Facebook.
Facebook?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, that was the other issue, that Facebook is now handing over to the special prosecutor some 3,000 ads placed by Russian entities, and that's where the dollars to donuts come in if they can find out whether the Russians or Russian entities did that with any kind of direction from U.S. sources.
Oh, right. So I don't know. I don't know what we'll find. Manafort strikes me as somebody that's kind of been a little bit dirty all along, and as soon as Trump figured that out, he fired him. My concern with the special prosecutor is that, number one, it's looking more and more like a fishing expedition that has expanded far beyond looking for Russian collusion. Number two, more and more people on my side of the worldview are not trusting it because of all of the Clinton and Obama attorneys that are as part of his team.
Frank, I'll give you a chance to respond to that, but we have to take a quick break first. Final thoughts when we return. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And Frank, I want to start with you to respond to what Rod was saying, that Special Prosecutor Mueller's staff is really a bunch of Obama, Clinton people, and that most Republicans think that that's what it is. It's a totally politicized investigation.
I just want the puzzle to be, I want to know what happened. And so I don't think these leaks are helping the Mueller team. Certainly the Trump administration hates the leaks, but they're damaging to Trump in many respects, but they might be damaging to the investigation. And so whether or not he's going beyond the bounds of what he's supposed to be looking at with respect to his mandate to investigate Russian meddling, I'm not going to be able to know until I see the final report. Before then, I'm just not going to draw any.
Rod, I want to ask you about that, because very often if you hear other political pundits on TV, they're saying, well, this investigation has been underway for more than a year now. There has been no evidence of collusion. But as somebody who's covered criminal prosecutions, I know that criminal prosecutions can take an awful long time before you get to the real answer.
Correct. And if this was your normal local criminal prosecution, you would say, we don't know anything yet. I mean, the media, the rest of us wouldn't know anything yet. But this has been, leaks hardly says it, this has been burst valves, of information. So much has been leaked so constantly. My suspicion is that there really probably isn't that much there that can be actually tied to Trump. Whether you can tie some things to his team like Flynn and Manafort, that's possible. But to Trump himself seems probably unlikely. What it is going to do, like Frank was saying, is I think it hurts both the credibility of the investigation and it hurts the ability of the Trump administration to carry out its presidential duties.
Jacob, I want to give you the last word in terms of, at least on the Suncoast, is this opinion falling mostly in terms of partisan views or
Yeah, I think everything about Trump pretty much does. And it's frustrating. I don't think you get a lot of objective eyes on things. And right now, people are in the defense mode for whichever side they are sympathetic to. You have a lot of people who are growing it in their head, the Mueller investigation, to be the ultimate end of the Trump administration, which is probably wild. And you also have people digging in on the right saying, this is a witch hunt and where's it going to go? Probably not very tethered to reality in either case.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. But before we go, some thoughts on last night's show. We discussed the World Rowing Championships, which begin at Nathan Benderson Park tomorrow. The event has attracted athletes from around 70 countries and is being held in the United States for the first time in over 20 years. The goal is to bring $25 million into the area from the event. Hurricane Irma was a bump in the road when preparing, but it looks like everything is ready to go for the championships. Patricia says, I am honored to have all of them here. Bringing countries together for an event such as this takes the heat off this crazy world we live in. Grant says, on the other hand, have Irma damage? No way I could afford this. Even if I wanted to go, seems hard sell after this bad storm. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. New College Political Science Professor Frank Alcock, Rod Thompson of the Sarasota Republican Club, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ magazine. When we return, we'll have a final look at your first alert weather. Plus, what is being said between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un now? We'll tell you after the break.